hi, Michelle. How are you doing today? Thank you for joining us again.
Thank you. I appreciate being here. Thank you very much for having me.
Yes. Okay. So Michelle is the president and CEO of the Food Bank of Iowa. Michelle, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, sure. I'd love that. I've been with the Food Bank of Iowa for a little more than 4 years, and I come to Food Bank of Iowa. I come to this nonprofit health and human services work after about 30 years in corporate America. I am a CPA myself and a certified internal auditor. Out of Iowa State University, I worked for Ernst and Winnie before becoming a hospital controller and then moving to Des Moines to work for Mid-American Energy, John Deere Financial, and then DuPont Pioneer before coming here. So coming into the food bank, I brought a lot of business experience with me, but was fairly naive upon arrival about all the complexities around food insecurity. So I've done a great deal to educate myself over the last 4 years, and look forward to the opportunity to share a little bit of that with your audience today, Catherine. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. That's a great way to start because we're talking about food insecurity today. So, what have you learned? What are you excited to share about us with us about food insecurity in the community and what we're collectively doing to combat it?
Well, I guess I'd start with a definition about food insecurity. Food insecurity, as defined by the USDA, is not having consistent access to enough nutrition to live a healthy and active life. And I think the key words there really are consistent and not enough, adequate access. If you recall from your sociology class in college, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, across the very bottom of that pyramid are the physiological needs that must be met before we can progress in our development: shelter, clothing, oxygen, water, and food being among those physiological needs. Yet so many people in our country today find that food is not something readily available, and it's a problem that exists in every neighborhood, in every community. Although I've got to be honest that before coming to the Food Bank of Iowa, I was not woke to that fact. I think it's very cool. My kids are trying to teach me new terminology, but I didn't see it. I lived in suburban area. I worked in corporate America, and in my circles, it wasn't readily apparent to me, although it was all around me. I find
Right,
that absolutely amazing.
right. I think when we think of living in America, that there's an abundance of food, right? And so it's hard sometimes for us to think that there is food insecurity. Um,
And it's true, there is an abundance of food. There certainly is abundance of food, but also there's huge economic inequity and disparity. And I'd like to, and this is why it's not that there's not enough food in the grocery stores or there's not enough food in the restaurants. That's not what causes food insecurity. It's people not having the money at the end of the day or at the end of the month, most likely, to go to the grocery store. Affordable housing, access to daycare, healthcare, mental health care, a living wage. So many of these things are creating challenges for a lot of our population. And I'd like to share something that I think is very interesting and paints a bit of a picture. So John Freeland, professor of business administration at Darden School of Business, has conducted a lot of research in this area. And he said, indeed, wealth and income inequity have increased over the previous half century. According to the Urban Institute, in 1963, a family in the 90th wealth percentile had about 6 times the wealth of the typical American family. This gap was relatively stable from the 60s up until 1983 when it quickly widened. So in 1963, average family had about 6 times the wealth. By 2016, the family at a 90th percentile had 12 times the wealth of the typical American family. So wealth now is concentrated with fewer people, greater wealth. So our middle class has shrunk drastically since the 1980s. And this leads to income inequity, which then leads to food insecurity.
Right. So when we're thinking about this income disparity, do racial and disparities play into this as well?
Most certainly, food insecurity closely tracks with poverty. So where you see poverty, you're going to see food insecurity. Poverty rates for African Americans are more than twice that for white Caucasian families. And so accordingly, African American households suffer food insecurity at a rate more than twice that of white households. 9% of all African American families live in poverty and suffer from food insecurity. It's very interesting that when you think about food insecurity, and I'm looking at this in the United States, of the people that suffer from food insecurity, 42% of the people that suffer food insecurity in the United States are Hispanic. 38% of the people who suffer food insecurity are Black. And then overall, about 34% of the folks today, April 2020, these numbers come from, 34% of people overall are suffering food insecurity, but in a disparate, a number, African Americans and Latinos suffer at higher rates.
Right. So in the coverage area for the Food Bank of Iowa, what are do you know the rates there in terms of food insecurity?
Well, if you look at the Iowa population itself, there are more than 3 million Iowans today, and about 90% of the population is white. Black population is 3.5%, and Hispanic is about 6%. But again, when we look back at the national figures, Iowa diverse populations suffer at a higher rate, and is very much in line with what we see in the United States. A large percentage of the folks that are food insecure in Iowa, about 7% are Black. And again, Hispanic, it's around 15% of Hispanics suffer from food insecurity in the state of Iowa.
Oh, okay, thanks for letting us know that. And then, so in terms of if they are food insecure, what are the types of programs that they can go to? So let's talk first about the difference between like a food bank and a food pantry.
Well, Food Bank of Iowa, of which I'm the CEO, is a Feeding America food bank. And Feeding America originated in the 1960s when a retired businessman realized that he's volunteering, serving people at a soup kitchen. Meanwhile, these folks are telling him they're going through the dumpster down the street behind the grocery store to pull out perfectly good edible food to take home to feed their families that night. So he sees, we have hungry people here, we're filling up landfills with good food here. Let's create the first food bank, and that happened in Arizona. There are now 200 Feeding America food banks across the United States. Every county in the United States is covered by one of these Feeding America food banks. Here in Iowa, there are 6 Feeding America food banks that operate. Food Bank of Iowa covers 55 counties right up the middle and then over to Illinois. It's our responsibility, a food bank's responsibility, to find as much free and reduced cost food as possible, procure it, keep it safe, and then deliver it to smaller frontline partner agencies. It's the partner agency that then takes it the last few feet, handing it to an Iowan who's struggling to make ends meet. So those partner agencies, in many cases, they can be food pantries. The traditional food pantry that might be in a church basement or might be in a community center. We also have about 100 school pantries that we work with across our 55 county service area. We work with daycares. We provide food to daycares for their meal preparation. senior feeding sites, homeless shelters, rehab centers, halfway houses, teen pregnancy houses. If it's a 501c3 and part of their mission is to provide nutrition to the people they serve, they can contract with a Feeding America food bank to get the resources they need to feed or prepare meals for the people they serve. So in many cases, that is a food pantry, but it could be many other kinds of service organizations as well.
That's amazing. So when you're talking about those type of, that you're contracting with, can you talk a bit about how COVID-19 has impacted the food bank and your partner agencies?
COVID-19 seems to have affected everything that we do. Before COVID-19, Food Bank of Iowa was very proud that the people we served could go into a local pantry, something that looked much like a small town grocery store, and select the items from the shelves, clearly displayed, that they would like to take home and prepare for their families, the food that they wanted to feed to their families. But with COVID and the need to social distance, we quickly changed our distribution models. So we are now distributing boxes of food that has been carefully curated and assembled in a box. It's ready and very quickly handed out to food insecure Iowans in a drive-through method. So rather than coming into the pantry today, the clients will maybe call ahead, say, hey, can I stop by and pick up a box of food? Or it might be a normal distribution time set aside, but they're popping their trunk and people are putting a box of food, maybe a couple of eggs, into their car, and it's pasta and pasta sauce, peanut butter and jelly, maybe it's always canned fruits, canned vegetables, canned proteins like a tuna or a chicken, and then as much fresh produce, milk, eggs, and cheese as we can get out into our geographic service area. But they don't get to choose. So this isn't the optimal way to take care of folks that just need a leg up, but it's the best we can do right now, maintaining social distancing protocols.
Right, that's huge. And so when you also mentioned that you help children to get access to that. So I know that the programs now are also geared towards that. Can you talk a bit about the kids' school program?
Yeah, it's the kids that I worry about the most, and it's the kids that give me the most joy. Growing up in a home which is food insecure, as you might assume, leads to immediate but also future issues and problems for these people. As a child, they learn to eat diets that are carb-rich, calorie-dense, because folks that are food insecure, that's typically what they depend on, and cheap fast food.
Right, correct.
So we see a lot of obesity in these populations, and it's because they can't afford diets that are rich in clean, lean proteins and produce like you and me. And so we really endeavor to get as much of these kinds of foods out to families with children. We had started our food pantry program with schools in 2015, and today we have 100 pantries embedded within elementary, middle, and high schools across our 55 counties. And even through COVID, many of these school pantries, most of them, almost all of our rural pantries, stayed open and continued to serve their families.
Oh, wow, that's great.
Again, putting boxes of food together, sometimes putting the inventory on their Facebook page, allowing families to shop, and they put it together and bring it out to the curb for them. But that's an important part, and that feeds the entire family. We also have the backpack program, which we have supported for years. Last year, we distributed 5,400 backpacks to elementary school children every Friday of every week in the school year.
Oh, wow.
And
I didn't know it was an ongoing program.
it's an ongoing program. We are in, oh, I don't know, I think now 54 schools, but many, many, many schools across the urban and rural area. But these are for, it's intended for kindergarten through fifth graders, so little people. And they get a grocery bag full of food with 12 to 14 individually labeled kid-friendly items tucked into their backpacks on Friday that they can take home. They found that kids that had something like this to rely upon over the weekend came back to school on Monday better prepared to learn, uh, more able to focus, less disruptive in class, and uh, it's a wonderful thing for the elementary school children, but it didn't take care of the full family. So that's where we have now been building more school pantries into our programming, because we know wherever there's a hungry second grader, there's probably an older sibling or a younger sibling and a guardian that's also hungry.
Yeah, for sure. So you had talked a bit about kind of how Feeding America started, and so you talked about food waste and food rescue. Could you talk about what it looks like now and what is food rescue?
Well, food waste is really, really interesting subject, and I have a 20 by 20 on our website that talks about food waste. There is a good amount of food waste in our country, and ironically, most of the food waste comes from my house and your house. It comes from the homes of people that are trying to eat healthy. Seem to be, they buy a lot of fresh produce. It spoils before they can prepare it, and it goes to waste. Now, during COVID, we are much better about that. We're eating at home more regularly, and there is less food waste coming from individual consumers' kitchens than there was before. Food Bank of Iowa rescues food from retail partners, Walmart, Target, Aldi. They are good national Feeding America level partners that we work with. We also work locally with Fairway and Hy-Vee, those kinds of retailers. So we pick up from them. We match a local pantry with the local retailer, and the pantry partner picks up from the retailer regularly, a set day and a set time every week. And that food then very quickly, it's timed, so the agency partner picks it up from the retailer on the same day they have a pantry distribution. So they're able to use whatever they've picked up to immediately get it out to the people that they serve. About 10% of the food waste in America comes from grocery stores. But what we've seen since COVID is that grocery stores don't have as much waste either. And we've seen a 50% decrease in the amount of food that we've been able to glean from grocery stores since COVID, just because they're more efficient, because we're now using the grocery stores more, each one of us as individuals. So less of our food is coming from rescue today than it did 6 months ago, but more of our food now is coming from the USDA. I would have said before COVID, 30% of the food that we distributed was coming from the USDA commodity food programs. Today, it's more like 42%. There are more government programs because of trade mitigation and also because of COVID.
Right. So the way it works then is they get a packaged, like a prepackaged box that will be partly what is distributed from the food bank, but then also from rescue. Is that the way that it works? I think it's a combination.
We have put together emergency food boxes here. If you or any of your listeners have volunteered at the Food Bank of Iowa recently, they have probably had an opportunity to pack emergency food boxes. So many of our partners are relying on the emergency food boxes packed at the Food Bank of Iowa because they are having difficulties getting volunteers in the door. Many of their volunteers are elderly and worried about COVID and trying to social distance more.
Right.
So if they're struggling to get volunteers, they may order the boxes pre-packed from Food Bank of Iowa and supplement those with whatever they have locally. Otherwise, many of our pantries are still ordering things by the case, breaking it down, packing their own boxes according to clients' orders or according to what they think the folks in their community are going to need.
That's excellent. So you mentioned volunteers at the food bank. What are some other opportunities that people can participate and contribute to helping
Well,
this cause?
Food Bank of Iowa has, we've not stopped. In fact, we have our foot heavy on the pedal since COVID struck. So we're not working from home. This is my work office. This is Food Bank of Iowa. I'm here almost every day, as is the rest of the passionate team of hunger fighters, the folks that work here at the Food Bank of Iowa. We have continued to host volunteer groups in the midst of COVID. We put into place a slew of precautions. Employees and volunteers alike, as soon as they enter the building, their temperature is taken. There's a series of questions asked. We wash our hands or use hand sanitizer immediately. Volunteers glove up and they mask up. Duct tape is a wonderful thing. We have used a series of duct tape symbols on our floor in different colors to make sure that volunteers continue to social distance when they are in our presence. And of course, we social distance in the office and in our distribution center as well. And our drivers always wear masks. We now have backpacks full of sanitation spray that we can wear the backpack and then spray down all of our work areas on a regular basis to make sure we're sanitizing as frequently as possible and in between our shifts. Volunteers can come in and they may pack emergency food boxes. They may be putting together backpacks that will go out to our backpack programs in rural Iowa that are still functioning. Or they may be taking bulk product, black beans in 2-ton totes, or quinoa or rice, and packaging that into 1 or 2 pound bags that will then go out to families.
Oh, that's excellent.
And for folks that don't want to come into the food bank to volunteer, we do have volunteers working at home to make face masks for us that we distribute to our volunteers, and we also make available to our clients. And we're also collecting t-shirts, and we have volunteers making those t-shirts into food distribution bags, cutting off the sleeves, sewing up the bottom, and it makes a really great, interesting food distribution bag, because boxes cost us $1.10 a piece. That $1 can go to provide 4 meals for Iowans in need. So we'd rather use donated t-shirts than to buy boxes when it's possible.
That's excellent. There's a lot of ways that people can get involved. Thank you so much, Michelle. I super appreciate you taking the time and sharing your knowledge with us. Could you let people know how to contact the food bank if they want to participate?
Absolutely. Our website is www.foodbankiowa.org. If you need help or you know somebody that needs help, go to our website, click the Need Help button, enter your zip code, and you'll find food pantry partners of ours that are nearest you. If you can help, click the Donate or the Volunteer button, and you'll be directed further. But I super appreciate being with you, Catherine, and I really appreciate that your firm is exploring this subject as well as so many other important topics. Thank you for what you do.